Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Scott's Selections here for Sunday, March 24th. Yesterday, pretty uneventful stuff. We ended up taking LSU -2 against Maryland, and they were up double digits for a decent portion of that game, then almost choked the game away entirely, and ended up sneaking away with a 2-point victory, which means we have our first push of the actual series, which brings our record on the show to 12-3-1. Now, one thing that is important to note, even though it was a push, still better than a loss in theory, but at the same point, LSU definitely should have covered that spread. Then Maryland switched to a 2-3 zone, and LSU's interim coach reared his head where he just couldn't make enough adjustments. But they ended up winning the game. Good for them. The right team won in the end, but doesn't help our bankroll as nothing pretty much happened, and we pushed. So, moving forward, I got another selection here for March 24th. And how's it going, Romeo? Nice to see you again. For one thing that we've done in the past is that we did do a first half total in the past, which ended up winning in that very nail-biter type of total between Villanova and St. Mary's in the first half, which we won. And we are actually going to be looking at another first half total where we are going to be looking at the Duke-UCF game. And we are going to be going with the Duke-UCF under 67.5 in the first half. Now, I know at first glance you're going to be thinking, why would you ever go with the under with Duke, with all the offensive firepower they have? But I believe that the reasons are justified, and I will go into those in a few minutes. First of all, just to set up the game is in a neutral site in South Carolina. It is important to note that if you have any player prop possibilities with Zion Williamson or anything available in your books, I would recommend taking that, considering the fact that Zion Williamson went to school in South Carolina. So it's a neutral game. It's a neutral site game, but Zion definitely will have motivation, and he will have some friends and family in attendance, as the game will be taking place in the state that he played high school basketball with, which made him the legend that he is currently. But to preview both teams, Duke is currently 30-5, where UCF is currently 24-8. Both of them winning convincingly in the first-round matchups, with Duke taking care of North Dakota State after a slow first half, where UCF absolutely destroyed VCU with issues with Marcus Evans, and UCF won that game by double digits. Now for some quick trends on why we like the under here. The under is 11-1-1 in Duke's last 13 non-conference games. The under is 5-1 in Duke's last 6 games following an ATS loss. The under is also 4-1 in Duke's last 5 neutral site games. And for UCF, the under is 3-0-1 in UCF's last 4 games versus the ACC. The under is 4-1 in UCF's last 5 games overall. And the under is 4-1 in UCF's last 5 games versus a team with a winning percentage above 60%. Now, for the main reason logistically on why we like the under in this matchup has to do with the fact that we just think UCF is going to try to slow the ball down dramatically in order to keep up with Duke's offensive firepower. Even though Duke is known for having great athletes and great scoring ability, Duke still is tied for 58th in points against with 67.4, whereas Central Florida is actually in the top 25, as they are 23rd in scoring defense with 64.1 points given up per game. Now, as usual, the reason why we like the first half is because if this game is close at the end, we don't want to deal with all that late fouling at the end of the game, which can lead to a lot of scramble points, and we want to avoid those at all costs in an elimination game. But we all know that Duke did play well in the second half against North Dakota State, but they did kind of sleepwalk for the first 20 minutes. And we just think that Duke is not a good enough three-point shooting team to handle the zone of UCF throughout the entire 40 minutes, especially with Taco Fall, who's 7'6" in the middle for UCF, who had a double-double where he had 18 rebounds in the game against VCU. UCF loves to slow the ball down. Behind Taylor and Dawkins, those are great scoring options, but they do typically like to run a lot of off-ball screens, which take a decent amount of time in their offense. And Taco Fall, defensively, in the middle of that paint, we know what Zion can do in the paint. We know what Barrett can do in the paint. Duke is not the greatest three-point shooting team, and that was sort of their Achilles heel, quote-unquote, going into this tournament. I do think Duke's going to win the game outright because there's no way. I just can't see UCF scoring enough points. But I would not surprise me to see Duke struggle initially in solving this 2-3 zone when you have a 7'6" guy in the middle of the paint, and Duke's going to be forced to take outside jump shots. So I think Duke will struggle. I think this total's a little bit too high. 67.5 seems a little bit much for me. I can see this game being close to half. I think this game will be in the 33-30 realm in the first half. Both teams will get to either the high 20s or low 30s. 67.5 is too much for me. Unless Duke shoots the lights out like they did in the second half against North Dakota State from the three-point line, I can't see how Duke's going to this line is priced if Duke's going to score 35 to 40 points in the first half, and I don't see that happening. UCF's offense naturally is very slow and methodical, and Duke definitely has the better athletes. So I expect UCF to have a significantly harder time scoring the ball than they did against VCU in the first round due to the length and the size, as well as Trey Jones, very underrated on-ball defending on the point guard position. So I think that UCF will struggle offensively early on and throughout possibly the entire game, whereas Duke will take a little while to adjust to the 7'6" man in the middle. I know that you can practice with a zone defense, but there's no way you can practice for a 2-3 defense with a 7'6" guy in the middle. I expect Duke to struggle initially trying to generate enough points, and if they end up trying to generate points, they're going to be settling for a lot of outside jump shots early on before Duke eventually figures out their way on how to attack this 2-3 zone. Now, the only way that I can see this game going over in the first half is if Taco Fall gets into foul trouble, but I'm under the impression that he will not due to the fact that UCF is playing his own defense. Assuming that all works out, I don't see how this total reaches 67.5 in the first half. So our selection for this game for Sunday, March 24th, is going to be the first half under 67.5 between Duke and UCF. And one thing that's important to note, which also applied to the game yesterday, we recommended LSU -2. The game ended up closing at roughly 2.5, which is just to remind everybody that try to get the best lines available that you can. I've already seen money come in on the under in the first half between Duke and UCF, as it is currently down to 67 in some spots, including intertops and 5 dimes. So if you can get 67.5 now, I'd recommend taking it. If it will go down to 67 by tip. That's pretty much a guarantee. It's already gone down to 67 in a couple of spots. But for our show, we will be taking 67.5 at -110, which will hopefully bring our record on this program with Scott Selection at satsalt.com to 13-3-1. But that's going to do it for this installment of Scott Selections here for March 24th. And I hope that the rest of you have a very nice, profitable week. And I hope that all of your brackets are still intact by Sunday's conclusion. Have a good day, everybody.